The maternity ward never truly slept. Machines breathed where mothers couldn't. The vents whispered lullabies over polished tile, and the scent of antiseptic hung like armor against the ghosts of blood. Nights like this blurred together, one shift melting into the next until even time felt sterilized. I'd been on my feet for 15 hours, halfway through a cold sandwich, when the overhead speaker cracked to life. Code Crimson, Trauma Bay 1. Possible maternal hemorrhage. I froze. The tone wasn't casual. It was the kind that slices through chatter and coffee breaks, the kind that makes everyone move. I tossed the sandwich, grabbed my gloves, and jogged down the corridor. It was 2:15 a.m., the hour when the city outside was silent, but inside San Giovanni Hospital, life screamed to be born. By the time I reached Trauma 1, 2 paramedics were rolling in a gurney. Blood soaked the sheets, a red river tracing the floor tiles. The woman on the bed was young, late 20s maybe, but her silk dress looked like it belonged on a magazine cover, not a stretcher. It shimmered beneath the trauma lights, torn open from the waist down. She was beautiful even like this, pale, trembling, breath coming in short, panicked bursts. Her right hand clutched a necklace, a gold serpent biting its own tail. "We found her on Via della Pace," one of the paramedics said. "Said she was in labor when the car spun out. There was a driver, but he took off." I scanned her vitals. Pulse thready, BP crashing. She's lost too much blood. Then I saw it. Something the others missed. 2 men had followed the gurney inside, both in black suits, both wearing expressions that didn't belong in hospitals. They didn't look like husbands or brothers. They looked like the kind of men who didn't knock before entering rooms. "Only staff beyond this point," I said automatically. They didn't move. "We're her security detail," one of them said in English with a faint Italian accent. His voice was controlled, but his hand hovered near the inside of his jacket. I ignored him. The woman's contractions were seconds apart. I pressed a hand to her abdomen. Baby was crowning. "All right," I said to my assistant nurse. "Let's move, suction, clamp, and get me an incubator ready." The woman tried to speak. Her eyes fluttered open, glossy with tears. Her lips moved, forming a single word, barely a whisper. "Rossi." I froze. "What?" Her fingers gripped mine for half a second before slipping away, and her arm fell limp against the bloodied sheet. "Stay with me," I said sharply, but I knew that look. I'd seen it too many times. Her pulse line flatlined into a thin, unbroken tone. "Time of death, 2:17. The silence that followed was suffocating. I cut the cord, suctioned the airway, rubbed the newborn's chest. Seconds later, a cry filled the room. High-pitched, fragile, but alive. I swallowed hard. The baby's skin was dusky at first, then pinked under the warm light. I held him close, small and furious in my arms. For a moment, everything else disappeared. The noise, the blood, the suited men. There was only him, and the ache, that hollow, cruel ache in my chest that had lived there since the night I lost my own child 6 months ago. When I looked up again, the 2 men were standing inches from the bed. One held out his hand. "We'll take him." "The hell you will," I said before I could stop myself. "He's premature. He needs observation. You can't just—" "You don't understand," the man said, voice tight. "This baby is—" I said back up. Something in my tone must have startled them. They actually did. I cradled the infant closer, felt the tiny rise and fall of his chest against my uniform. "You can tell the father," I said, "that whoever he is, his child's going to live." The second man exhaled slowly, like he'd been waiting for that line. Then he pulled a phone from his coat pocket and murmured something in Italian. His tone was low, reverent almost. When he hung up, his eyes met mine. He'll want to see the nurse. By dawn, the hospital felt different. Too quiet, like sound itself was afraid. The administrative floor had gone dark. Cameras flickered to black, one by one. The janitor said the power surge was strange, but no one asked questions. I was in the nursery, watching the baby sleep inside his tiny incubator. His fists were curled tight, like he was ready to fight the world already. I reached out and traced a finger along the glass. "You've had a rough start, little one." The door clicked open behind me. I turned and froze. A man stood there tall, dressed in a charcoal suit that looked sculpted to him, a dark coat over his shoulders. His presence changed the air. He didn't look at me right away. His eyes went straight to the infant. Then slowly, he lifted his gaze to mine. They were a dark, unyielding gray, like storm clouds that had forgotten how to rain. "I am told," he said softly, his accent smooth and deliberate. "You delivered my son." The voice matched the power I'd heard in the trauma room. Low, controlled. Like someone who'd learned a long time ago that yelling was for men without real authority. I nodded cautiously. "You must be Mr. Rossi." The name hit harder now that I'd seen the man. Milanesi Rossi. Every nurse in Milan had heard that name in whispered rumors. Wealth. Influence. The kind of power that never appeared on news headlines, but always owned them from the shadows. "I need to see the mother," he said. I swallowed. "I'm sorry. She didn't make it." For a heartbeat, his face didn't move. Then his jaw flexed, a single tick in the stillness. "Was it quick?" "Yes." I hesitated. "She said your name. Right before." He exhaled through his nose, eyes falling shut for a second. Then, "Thank you." No emotion. No visible grief. Just those two words, measured and final. He stepped closer to the incubator, resting one hand against the glass. "He will live?" "He's strong," I said. "He just needs time." "And you?" "Me?" "You were there. You saw everything. You touched him first." I frowned. "I'm a nurse. It's my job." "No," he said quietly. "It was fate." I didn't know what to say to that. His hand slid from the incubator to his coat pocket. He pulled out the same gold serpent necklace I'd seen in the trauma room, now wiped clean of blood. "She carried this for protection," he murmured, "but protection failed her." He looked up again, and for the first time, I thought I saw something human flicker behind that stone expression. "Come with us," he said. I blinked. "Excuse me?" "The child trusts your scent," Rossi said evenly, "and I trust no one else." "Mr. Rossi!" He raised a hand, silencing me. "Not a request." Behind him, the two suited men stepped forward. One carried a sleek black carrier. The other held paperwork already stamped with an emblem I didn't recognize. "Where are you taking him?" I demanded. Rossi's gaze met mine. Dark, unreadable. "Home." "And me?" A pause. Then, with unsettling calm, "You'll see soon enough." The corridor outside filled with the sound of shoes, measured, rhythmic, military. My heartbeat tried to keep up and failed. When I glanced back at the baby, his small hand had found the edge of the blanket. His grip was strong for something so fragile. "I'm not leaving him," I said quietly. "I know," Rossi replied. "That's why you're coming." He turned toward the door, and the two guards followed. I hesitated, just long enough to wonder if I'd regret this. Then I reached into the incubator, lifted the child, and felt the weight of a world I hadn't asked for settle in my arms. Outside, the early dawn pressed its gray light against the windows. Somewhere beyond the gates, engines were running. I whispered to the baby, "We're just going for a ride, okay?" But even I didn't believe it. Subscribe if you haven't already, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow's story unfolds darker, deeper, and far more dangerous than you think. Now, let's begin the tale. I used to believe hospitals were the loudest places on earth, monitors beeping, pages echoing, shoes squeaking against linoleum. But that morning, driving through the sleeping streets of Milan, I learned there's a different kind of noise. The kind silence makes when you're trapped inside it. The convoy cut through the city like a shadow. 3 black SUVs, tinted glass, no license plates I could read. I sat in the middle vehicle, clutching the infant against my chest, while 2 men flanked me on either side, motionless as statues. No one spoke. The driver's eyes never left the road. The rearview mirror offered me flashes of another car behind us, and in it, Rossi. Even at that distance, I could feel his presence, the weight of it. Like the air itself was aware of who he was. I tried to count streetlights, tried to memorize turns, but the deeper we went, the fewer lights there were. Milan gave way to narrow roads and open darkness. Lake Como glittered faintly ahead, moonlight breaking over the water like scattered glass. That's when I realized where we were headed. Rossi's villa, or what the tabloids called the fortress on the lake. We passed through iron gates taller than any hospital door I'd ever walked through. 2 guards stood watch, rifles slung across their chests, eyes trained on me like I was carrying something more dangerous than a baby. Inside, the mansion rose like something out of another century. Marble, glass, and silence. Everything smelled faintly of cedar and power. "Follow me," one of the men said. I hesitated, tightening my hold on the child. "I need to call the hospital. They'll file a missing. They already know," he interrupted. That stopped me. "What?" "Official report says you were reassigned for emergency neonatal care, signed by Dr. Valenti himself." I stared at him. "That's not possible." He didn't bother replying. I followed them inside, my shoes echoing on the marble. The walls were lined with paintings, dark oils of Italian saints and wars. The air was too still, too clean. We stopped at the base of a grand staircase. That's where I saw him. Rossi stood at the top, one hand resting on the banister, the other inside his coat pocket. His suit was black, but under the light, it gleamed like the surface of obsidian. The same serpent ring glinted on his finger, gold biting gold. His eyes found me instantly. "Come upstairs." His tone wasn't loud, but it left no room for refusal. I followed. Every step felt heavier, like the air thickened with each level of the house I climbed. At the end of a long corridor, he opened a door into what looked like a nursery. Soft light, white curtains, a bassinet carved from walnut, stocked with more silk than I'd seen in my entire life. "Lay him here," Rossi said. I did, gently. The baby stirred, let out a soft whimper, then fell silent again. Rossi stepped beside me. He didn't look at me at first, just at the child. His expression barely changed, but I could feel something beneath the surface, something he wasn't used to showing. "His name?" I asked quietly. "None yet. He deserves one." His gaze shifted to me. He will have what he deserves when he's safe. I crossed my arms. "Then tell me why he isn't." Rossi's lips curved slightly, not quite a smile, more like the ghost of one. "You have courage, Miss Barnes. Most people don't look me in the eye when they question me. I'm not most people. No, he said softly. You're not. He walked to a side table and poured something dark into a crystal glass. The woman, Alessandra, she was supposed to be protected. Someone inside my family made sure she wasn't. That betrayal cost her life. And you think they'll come for the baby next? He nodded once. They already tried. My stomach tightened. That night at the hospital, the men who brought her in, Rossi finished. One was loyal, the other wasn't. He disappeared before sunrise. And you brought me here because you were the last person to touch them both alive. The way he said it made my skin crawl. So what am I to you? I asked. A suspect? A witness? A hostage? He met my eyes without blinking. None of those. Then what? He took a sip from the glass. A variable I can't yet calculate. The words hung between us, sharp and cold. I turned back toward the baby. He needs oxygen monitoring and warmth. I can't do that here unless you have. Everything you need is already prepared. Of course it was. I looked at him again. You planned this. I prepare for what I can't control, he said simply. You are one of those things. I'm not staying. Yes, you are. The firmness in his tone made me flinch. Not from fear, from the quiet certainty of it. I exhaled through my nose, trying to steady my voice. Mr. Rossi, I don't know what kind of people you deal with, but I have a life outside this mansion. His expression didn't change. Do you? That question hit harder than it should have. He knew. Somehow, he knew about the miscarriage, the fiancé who'd walked away, the empty apartment that no longer felt like home. How do you? Files are easy to access when you own the hospitals, he said, voice calm. I needed to know who held my son first. My pulse spiked. You had no right. I had every right, Rossi interrupted, his voice low but edged. You stepped into my world when you brought him into this one. For a moment, neither of us moved. The space between us was thick with something that wasn't just tension. It was understanding wrapped in defiance. You're angry, he observed quietly. Wouldn't you be? He tilted his head slightly. Yes, but I've learned to use anger, not drown in it. A cry broke the silence. The baby's small wail shattered whatever careful distance we'd built. I moved toward the crib automatically, but Rossi was faster. He reached in, scooped the child up with practiced ease. The transformation was startling. The predator softened by something fragile in his hands. The baby quieted almost immediately. Rossi looked down at him, then at me. He trusts you, he said. But he listens to me. That's because you're both terrifying. A laugh, brief, surprised, escaped him. I haven't heard that in years. I smirked before I could stop. Myself. Guess I'm refreshing. You are inconvenient, he said, still smiling faintly. And inconvenient things tend to last longer than expected. He handed me the child again, and as I cradled him, his tone shifted. Lower, more serious. You will stay in the East Wing, he said. Lucia will attend to you. Guards are posted outside your door at all times. You will not leave the property until I say otherwise. That sounds a lot like captivity. It's protection. For who? For all of us. Rossi moved to the doorway, pausing beneath the arch. His silhouette cut against the gold morning light streaming through the window. I'll have answers soon, he said. Until then, keep him alive. The door shut behind him with a quiet finality that echoed louder than any slam. I looked down at the infant, his tiny mouth twitching, eyelids fluttering. He looked peaceful, unaware that his life was already currency in a war he hadn't chosen. I whispered, "What have you pulled me into, little one?" Outside, a guard's radio crackled in Italian. I caught fragments. Capo, ordine, traditore, boss, orders, traitor. My chest tightened. I sank into the chair beside the crib, exhaustion finally sinking its claws into me. Somewhere in the mansion, footsteps moved like whispers, slow, deliberate, dangerous. The serpent ring, the power, the silence. It all began to make sense. This wasn't protection. It was containment disguised as care. And Milanesi Rossi? He wasn't a man used to losing things. He was a man who collected them, even people. As I drifted into uneasy half-sleep, one final thought burned behind my eyelids. I'd delivered a child into the world, but maybe, just maybe, I'd also delivered myself into his father's. And the way Rossi had looked at me with that quiet, assessing stillness. He didn't see a nurse anymore. He saw a problem he didn't yet know how to let go of. Morning came dressed in gold, but it didn't feel like dawn. It felt like surveillance. The moment I opened my eyes, I knew I wasn't alone. There was no sound, just a shift in the air, like even the walls were awake before me. My room was too perfect. The sheets were white linen, crisp, unslept in despite my tossing. The curtains hung heavy enough to keep out light, but not shadows. I could sense them outside the door, posted and waiting. The baby's soft cry broke the stillness. I slipped out of bed and crossed the room. The crib stood near the window, sunlight spilling across his tiny hands. I whispered, "Good morning, little fighter," and for a heartbeat, the world softened again. Then the doorknob turned. I spun around, pulse jumping. A woman entered, maybe in her late 50s, small, neat, with silver-streaked hair pulled into a tight bun. Her black uniform matched the solemn air of the place. "Signora Barnes," she said with a faint accent, "I am Lucia. Mr. Rossi asked that I see to your needs." My needs? The phrase made me stiffen. "I don't need anything," I said, "except to go home." She gave me a patient smile, the kind you give someone who doesn't yet understand how impossible their request is. "No one leaves until Mr. Rossi says so. Breakfast is ready." Her tone was polite but final. She turned to the crib, adjusting the blanket with gentle precision. "He sleeps well, like his father did as a child." The words hit me harder than I expected. "You knew him when he was little?" "I've been with this family since before he could walk," she said softly, "and I've buried more of them than I care to remember." There was grief in her voice, quiet and sharp. Before I could respond, she added, "It's better to follow the rules here, Signora. Some walls have ears, and some men prefer silence to disobedience." Then she left, the door clicking shut behind her. I fed the baby, changed him, then spent the next hour pacing the room, counting the seconds between guard shifts outside. At some point, curiosity won over fear. I cracked the door open just enough to peek. The hallway stretched long and pale, flanked by marble statues that looked too lifelike to be comforting. No one stopped me, so I stepped out. My bare feet made no sound on the polished floor. The east wing was a maze of glass corridors, wide panels overlooking the lake, sunlight bouncing off the water in cold silver flashes. It was beautiful, yes, but there was something unnatural about it, like the house was designed to watch itself. Every few meters, I passed another armed guard, all in black, earpieces in, silent. Each of them nodded slightly as I walked by, but their eyes never left me. Freedom, I realized, was a concept here, not a reality. I found the main staircase again and descended into what looked like a gallery. Paintings of the Rossi lineage hung from floor to ceiling. Generations of men with the same eyes, gray, sharp, unreadable. I stopped in front of the last portrait. It wasn't a painting. It was a photograph. Milanesi Rossi, younger, standing beside a woman, the same woman I'd watched die on my table, Alessandra Vitale. Her smile was radiant. His wasn't. Between them stood a cradle. I felt a chill trace my spine. So this was the peace marriage the tabloids whispered about, the union meant to merge two criminal empires. And now that she was gone, her baby was both an heir and a threat. Admiring the artwork? The voice behind me almost stopped my heart. I turned. Rossi stood near the grand piano, jacket off, shirt sleeves rolled to his forearms. His presence filled the room, quiet but absolute. I was exploring, I said carefully. Exploring or escaping. I met his gaze. If I wanted to escape, you wouldn't have seen me. A faint smirk ghosted across his face. You think that highly of your skills, Nurse Barnes? I think very little of cages, I replied. His smirk faded, replaced by something heavier. You're not my prisoner. Then why are there men with guns outside my door? Because last night someone tried to kill you. My pulse stopped for half a second. What? He stepped closer, eyes locking on mine. A man approached the property from the North Woods at 3 a.m. with a rifle fitted with a laser scope. The shot would have gone through the nursery window. My chest tightened. But the baby is unharmed, because my men stopped him before he could take it. I swallowed hard. And what happened to him? Rossi's gaze didn't waver. He won't try again. The way he said it made my stomach knot. I moved toward the window instinctively. The glass stretched from floor to ceiling, the view magnificent, until I noticed the faint spiderweb cracks on the bottom corner. The bullet had found the glass, at least. I pressed a hand to the pane. The air outside felt colder now. Rossi came to stand beside me. This house is built on transparency, he said. But sometimes that means we bleed in the open. I turned to him. And you think someone inside your family did this? He nodded once. A cousin. Maybe more. Betrayal is a currency here, Miss Barnes. You'll learn that soon enough. I crossed my arms. And where does that leave me? He studied me for a long moment. Protected. For now. The way he said it sent a shiver down my spine. That night I couldn't sleep. The mansion was too quiet. A silence so thick it felt unnatural. I sat near the crib, reading the same line in a baby manual over and over without absorbing a word. At some point, exhaustion won. I must have dozed off. What woke me wasn't the baby's cry. It was light, a thin red beam crawling across the floor. My heart seized. It moved slowly, deliberately, sliding up the wall toward the crib. No! I lunged forward without thinking, throwing myself over the baby just as the glass shattered. The shot tore through the air, deafening, hot, metallic. Pain bloomed across my shoulder. I didn't even realize I was bleeding until I saw crimson pooling beneath my hand. The baby wailed. Then chaos exploded. The door burst open. Men flooded the room. Rossi was the first. He was shouting orders in Italian, voice raw, lethal. Chiudete tutto, nessuno entra o esce. Lock everything. No one in or out. I felt his hands on me, steady, grounding. Stay with me, Abby. His voice was sharp but urgent, the first time he'd used my name. I'm fine, I lied, clutching the crying child closer. He's okay. Blood dripped down my arm. My vision blurred. Rossi tore a strip of fabric from his own shirt and pressed it to my wound. His touch was firm, controlled. You took the bullet meant for my son." "Lucky timing," I whispered through clenched teeth. He looked at me then. Really looked. His eyes weren't steel anymore. They were something else. Something dangerously close to reverence. "No," he said quietly. "Not luck. Loyalty." I don't remember much after that. Just the sound of boots on marble, gunfire echoing somewhere distant, and Rossi's voice telling someone to call the doctor now. When I came to, the room was dim. My arm was bandaged, my body heavy with exhaustion. Rossi sat beside the bed, still in the same blood-stained shirt. His sleeves were rolled up, his hands clasped together, one thumb running slowly across the serpent ring. He didn't look like a Mafia boss then. He looked like a man who'd spent too long in war. "You should be resting," I murmured. He glanced up. "So should you." Silence stretched between us, thick with everything unspoken. "You saved him," he said finally. I smiled weakly. "That's my job." He shook his head. "It was more than duty. You bled for him. For me." I met his gaze. "Would you have done the same?" He didn't hesitate. "Yes." There was no bravado in it. Just truth. And that scared me more than the bullet. He leaned forward, voice low. "You've just rewritten your destiny, Abby Barnes." Then he rose and left, his footsteps fading down the hall, leaving behind a silence that no longer felt empty. It felt inevitable. When I woke, the light was soft, the kind that made everything look dreamlike, even pain. For a moment, I didn't remember where I was. The sheets beneath me were silk, cool and heavy, the room too grand to belong to a hospital. Then the smell hit me. Cedarwood, leather, and faint smoke. The scent of him. Rossi. I tried to sit up, but a sharp ache lanced through my shoulder. A clean bandage wrapped around it, tight but careful. Someone had stitched me up with precision. The baby's soft cry echoed from the next room. That sound anchored me. Whatever world I'd fallen into, some things hadn't changed. A life was still depending on me. The door opened before I could move. Lucia stepped in, holding a tray. Steam rose from a porcelain bowl of broth. "You should not be sitting up," she scolded gently. "I've been through worse," I murmured. She set the tray on the nightstand and adjusted my pillow. "You lost a lot of blood." He sat there until the doctor finished. "He?" She gave me a look. "Who else?" "Mr. Rossi. He hasn't left this floor since the attack." That shouldn't have meant anything, but it did. "Is the baby okay?" I asked quickly. Lucia smiled softly. "Sleeping. Fed. You saved him, Signora Barnes. Even the boss knows it." I leaned back against the pillow. "He should thank his security team, not me." Lucia's voice lowered. "He doesn't thank anyone. But for you?" She hesitated, as if choosing her words carefully. "He broke his own rule." A shadow moved across the doorway, and Lucia straightened. Rossi entered the room quietly, wearing a fresh suit, the top button undone. He didn't look like a man who'd slept. His eyes, however, held a strange steadiness, the kind that didn't come from rest, but resolve. "Lucia," he said, "leave us." She nodded and disappeared down the corridor. Rossi stood by the bed, hands in his pockets. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched between us like a wire, thin, fragile, ready to snap. "You should have called for help," he said finally. "I did," I replied. "It just arrived late." He didn't smile. "You shouldn't have shielded him." I met his gaze. "Would you rather I let your son die?" Something flickered in his eyes. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You could have been killed." "Maybe," I said. "But I'm alive, And so is he. Seems like we both got lucky." He studied me, not like a man observing a patient, but like someone trying to understand an equation that didn't make sense. "You don't look afraid," he said quietly. "I don't have the energy to be." That earned the faintest ghost of a smirk. Brave or reckless, I haven't decided. I exhaled softly. Maybe both. He pulled a chair closer to the bed and sat, elbows resting on his knees. The serpent ring on his finger caught the light, the same ring I'd seen the night his wife died. "You lost blood," he said, "but no artery. You'll heal. You sound like a doctor. I've seen enough wounds to recognize one that won't kill. Yours or others?" His eyes lifted to mine, unreadable, unflinching. "Both." A silence settled between us again, heavier this time. Then he spoke, almost to himself. "When I was 14, my father was shot outside our home. He told me to never show pain, not even to God. 'Pain is a currency, Milanesi,' he said. 'Spend it wisely.'" I swallowed. "That's a cruel way to grow up." He gave a faint, humorless laugh. "Cruelty builds stronger men, or broken ones, sometimes both." I wanted to say something human, but the words tangled in my throat. Instead, I asked, "And what about mercy? Does your father's lesson leave room for that?" His gaze sharpened. "Mercy gets men like me killed. Or saved," I said softly. He didn't answer, but his silence felt heavier than words. Later that afternoon, Lucia brought the baby in. Rossi stood beside me as I held him, the infant's tiny fingers curling around the edge of my bandage. "You should rest," I said without looking at him. "You've barely slept either." "I rest when there's peace," he said. "Then you never do." He didn't deny it. The baby stirred, his eyes fluttering open, dark, curious, unknowing. Rossi leaned closer, and for a moment something softened in him. "He has her eyes," he murmured. I glanced up. "His mother's?" Rossi nodded, his expression unreadable. "Alessandra wanted to leave this life. She said love shouldn't be measured in power or protection. I told her she was naive." "Maybe she was brave," I whispered. He looked at me then, and for the first time, there was no arrogance in his gaze, only honesty, raw and disarming. "You remind me of her. You do what's right, even when it's foolish." "I'm a nurse," I said quietly. "That's the job." "No," he said, shaking his head. "That's who you are." Something in the way he said it made my chest tighten. As the evening settled, the lake outside glowed silver under the moonlight. I sat near the window, the baby asleep beside me, while Rossi lingered by the fireplace, silent, hands clasped behind his back. The wound on my shoulder pulsed, but it wasn't pain that kept me awake. It was the awareness of him, the way his presence filled the room even when he didn't speak. Finally, I broke the silence. "You never asked why I was working that night." He turned slightly. "I don't need to know. But you already do, don't you?" He met my eyes. "Yes. The miscarriage. The fiancé who left. The apartment with rent overdue. I know." His voice wasn't cruel. It was careful. I looked down. "Then you know I didn't choose that shift for heroism. I chose it because I had nowhere better to be." Rossi's footsteps were quiet as he crossed the room. He stopped in front of me, close enough that I could feel the heat of him, smell the faint scent of cologne and gun oil. "Sometimes," he said softly, "the people with nowhere to be end up where they're meant to." I met his gaze, pulse unsteady. "You think this, all of this, is fate?" "I think nothing is accidental," he said. "Not you, not the baby, not that night." The way he looked at me then, like he could see everything I'd lost, everything I was trying to hold together, made my throat tighten. I wanted to hate him. I wanted to remind myself who he was, the man whose world ran on fear and blood. But all I could think about was how gently he'd held his son earlier, and how his voice had softened when he said my name. The clock struck midnight. Lucia had long gone. The fire burned low, casting amber light across the floor. Rossi moved to the window, looking out at the lake. "You should sleep," he said without turning. I shook my head. Every time I close my eyes, I hear the gunshot. He turned then, slowly, deliberately, and walked toward me. "Then keep them open." He sat on the chair beside the crib, elbows resting on his knees. For a long while, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the baby's steady breathing. I don't know how long we stayed like that. Two strangers bound by blood that wasn't shared, but had already changed both of us. When I finally spoke, my voice was barely above a whisper. "Why me, Rossi? Out of everyone you could have trusted. Why me?" He leaned forward, eyes shadowed but calm. "Because you bled for him. For me. And in my world, that kind of loyalty isn't given. It's earned." He rose, straightened his cuffs, and looked down at me one last time before leaving. At the doorway, he paused. "Sleep, Abby. You're safe here, even if you don't believe it yet." The door clicked shut behind him. I sat there in the silence, my heart refusing to slow. Safe wasn't the right word. Safe was what I used to feel in bright hospital corridors and sterile air. This, whatever this was, felt like standing at the edge of something vast and dangerous. And for reasons I couldn't name, I didn't step back. Morning arrived like a rumor. Thin light, long shadows, and more questions than answers. Lucia brought coffee I hadn't earned and news I didn't want. "The family council convenes at noon," she said, smoothing a wrinkle from the duvet as if the fabric had personally offended her. "There will be discussion." "Discussion about what?" I asked, though I already knew. Me. The baby. The bullet that should have ended both of us. "Safety," she said, which in this house carried synonyms: leverage, optics, control. When she left, I stood by the window and watched the lake comb itself into silver threads. The mansion's glass walls threw back my reflection, pale, bandaged, hair in a messy knot, a nurse in borrowed silk. I didn't look like someone who belonged here. I looked like a complication pretending to be necessary. By mid-morning, the house felt charged, men moving with purpose, radios hissing under their breath, doors opening and closing with the soft finality of verdicts. I carried the baby down the corridor for sun and warmth, humming a tune I hadn't realized I remembered until my lips found it. He blinked up at me, solemn, as if trying to decide whether to trust the world he'd been dragged into. "Don't," I whispered. "Not yet." At the landing overlooking the main hall, 2 guards stood aside and pretended not to watch me. I pretended not to notice. The hall below had been rearranged for the council. One long table polished to the point of reflection, chairs set like chess pieces. Portraits of men with the same iron eyes watched from gilded frames. It felt like a courtroom without a judge. A voice drifted up the stairwell, low and precise. "Rossi." He stood at the head of the table, jacket off, sleeves rolled. He wasn't performing power. He was wearing it. I should have walked on. Instead, I tucked into a shallow balcony alcove that left me half hidden, half invited. Old habits, triage first, curiosity second, had been rearranged by this house. Men filtered in. Some nodded to Rossi. Some tried to look him in the face and failed. A familiar one arrived last. The cousin I'd heard in midnight whispers. Enzo. He had the kind of smile that never touched the eyes. Rossi didn't sit. He rested his fingertips on the table and waited until the murmurs died. "The house was breached," he said simply. "We found the shooter's approach. North Woods." He did not act alone. Enzo tilted his head, a picture of polite shock. "You're certain?" "Certain enough to bury a man," Rossi replied without heat, "but I prefer to bury the right one." A ripple moved through the room. Not fear exactly, but recognition. Everyone here understood the grammar of threat. It didn't take long for my name to surface. "The nurse," a man in a dove-gray suit began, careful, "complicates optics. She was present before the mother's death. Present when the baby was taken from the hospital. Present during the attack. We do not know who she speaks to." "She speaks to the child," Rossi said, not looking away. "That's why he breathes quiet." "Then let her speak to him somewhere else," the man pressed. "We are a fortress, not a sanctuary." Enzo folded his hands. "Milanesi, your mercy has weight we cannot carry. Alessandra's family already whispers. Keep the nurse and you invite war. Send her away and you control the terms." He was good. Every word reasonable, every motive practical. I almost believed him. Almost. Rossi's gaze lifted to the balcony. For a heartbeat, I thought he'd seen me. He hadn't. He was staring through glass, past portraiture, at the idea of a future he could stomach. "No one touches her," he said. "She remains. She is under my name." The words landed like steel. "If you have a problem with that, find a door. I won't stop you." Silence swallowed the hall. No one moved. Enzo's smile cracked into something thinner. "As you wish, Cugino." I exhaled, only then realizing I'd been holding air like a bad secret. The baby yawned. Somewhere, a clock struck noon like a slow heartbeat. I should have gone back to the room. Instead, I made the mistake of wandering. The nursery in this house wasn't a room. It was a thesis. Warm wood, soft lamplight, an armchair that had already learned my shape. I laid the baby down and was adjusting the monitor when a soft click sounded behind me. Not a door, a panel. It swung inward a fraction, then paused. I stared. The panel was half hidden behind a shelf of picture books, the sort of quaint secrecy that belonged in fairy tales and bad security plans. Curiosity and caution wrestled. Curiosity won by a breath. Inside, a narrow corridor ran like a spine along the nursery wall. The air smelled cool and old. A faint hum vibrated through stone, electric, not architectural. I stepped in, cradle quiet, and followed the hum to a small room where wires gathered like veins at a heart. Not art. Surveillance. A bank of monitors perched in almost pitch black. One screen showed the nursery, minutes ago, me singing nonsense to calm a hiccup. Another showed the east corridor, my door, the balcony I'd eavesdropped from. Someone had been watching me. Us. From inside the house. And then, the sound. Not live. Recorded. A hiss, then words under the static, time-stamped too. Nights ago, male voices, muffled, urgent. "The bear, idiota. Don't touch anything else. I planted it where she'll never look. Rossi." A low laugh. "Busy delivering his legacy. We finish what we started after sunrise." My skin pulled tight. The bear. The plush I'd propped in the crib to quiet the room. I spun back into the nursery like I'd been shot. Tossed the books aside. My fingers sank into the seam at the bear's neck and found the stitch that wasn't factory made. I ripped. A black disc popped into my palm. matte, thin, with a blinking dot and the kind of patience most people only pretend they have. "Oh, God," I whispered. "Not again." A shadow filled the doorway. Rossi. He took one look at my face, then at my hand. His expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room dropped. "Where did you find it?" he asked. "In the bear," I said. "Hidden. Recorded nursery, corridor, balcony. There's a crawl space behind the shelf. The feed runs to a panel room. It's been here since before I arrived." He held out his hand. I gave him the disc. He weighed it once, like a coin in a country without currency. "Who else knows this room?" I asked. "Lucia," he said, "and the family that built it, all of whom are dead, and whoever installed this." "Enzo," I said before I could blunt it. Rossi's mouth made a shape that wasn't a smile. "You're not wrong enough to be ignored." He stepped to the shelf and slid the panel wider, looked in, looked back at me. "You should be afraid," he said quietly. "I am," I said. "Of the wrong thing." "And what is the right thing?" "Being used as bait." My voice surprised me, steadier than I felt. "Someone wants me to deliver the child to them for free. All they need is my routine and your blind spot." His eyes flicked to the crib. The baby slept, mouth parted, the embodied lie of peace. "Stay here," Rossi said. "Hold him. Don't open the door for anyone but me." He left without sound. The panel sealed shut with a small, obedient sigh. Minutes dragged their feet. My shoulder throbbed. The monitor hummed. Somewhere far off, wood cracked. The sound of a door closing the hard way. Italian rippled in the hall, rushed and ugly. A second voice, familiar and oily, answered, "Enzo." I picked up the baby and stood with my back pressed to the wall, breath caged. Boots crossed the nursery threshold, then stopped. Not Rossi. Different weight, different intent. The handle jiggled once, twice, then stilled. "April," a voice whispered at the seam. "Open." "No," I whispered back, to myself, to the door, to the universe. And then it was over. Footsteps moved away. Silence put itself back on like a coat. When Rossi returned, he wasn't alone. 2 men trailed him, one with knuckles swollen, the other with shoulders set in the shape of consequence. Enzo wasn't among them. "Come," Rossi said. Not a request. A pulling tide. I followed to the great hall. The long table had been cleared of formality and replaced with judgment. Enzo stood near the far end, face clean, suit immaculate, hair untroubled. But his eyes were smudged with an emotion too cowardly to be guilt. Rossi laid the black disc on the table like a chalice. "Explain," he said. Enzo laughed, high, brittle. "Explain what? That you've gone soft? That you parade a nurse like a saint and expect the wolves to kneel?" No one breathed. "Alessandra," Rossi said. The name was winter on his tongue. "You told her she was safe." Enzo's smile faltered. "She wasn't built for this world, Cugino. You knew that better than anyone." Rossi moved once, just once, and I learned what the room had always known. Stillness is a mask some men wear to keep the violence from spilling. "Who placed the device?" he asked. Silence. Enzo didn't blink. Rossi's jaw flexed. "Name," he said. Enzo gave a name I didn't know. A lesser cousin. A man who would never be seen again. "And the plan?" Rossi asked. "To take the baby on the transfer," Enzo said, finding bravado where he should have found mercy. "To return him to the Vitales and settle a debt you created when you married their daughter and promised her peace." Something wavered in Rossi's face then, something I'd never seen before. Grief is not always loud. Sometimes it's a flicker across a man who refuses to collapse. He nodded once to the men behind Enzo, hands on shoulders, knees to marble, a sentence written without ink. "Stop," I heard myself say. My voice echoed too bright in the cold hall. "Not in front of his son." Rossi looked at me, really looked, like he was deciding whether to be the man who ends things in front of cradles or behind doors. He turned away. "Outside," he said. They took Enzo through the side doors. The sound that followed wasn't loud. It was final. When Rossi came back, the room felt smaller. He stood at the head of the table and smoothed an invisible crease from the wood. The gesture was surgical, precise, human. "You shouldn't have seen that," he said. I held the baby tighter. "You shouldn't have to do that." "No," he said, voice low. "But when men betray what we build, the cost is collected." "By you," I said. "From me," he corrected. "Always from me." For a moment, the hall didn't feel like a courtroom anymore. It felt like a mausoleum. That night, I found him in the nursery long after the house had gone quiet. He was standing by the crib, the room washed in soft amber. He didn't turn when I entered. He just looked down at his son as if trying to memorize a face the world would try to take from him again and again. "He has her eyes," he said without prompting, and I heard both love and apology in the same breath. "And my enemies." I moved to stand beside him. We watched the baby sleep. His little chest rose and fell, untroubled by the mathematics of blood. "You're not mourning a wife," I said finally. "You're mourning a promise you couldn't keep." His jaw worked, a muscle flickering like a warning light. "I'm mourning what loyalty costs," he said. "What it always costs." He didn't touch me. I didn't move away. The silence between us wasn't empty anymore. It was full of choices, of debts, of a crown no one had asked to wear. Outside, the lake turned black and then silver and then black again, as if the night couldn't decide which truth to keep. I knew the feeling. There's a silence that follows violence. A strange, hollow quiet, like the air itself is holding its breath. That silence filled the Rossi estate after Enzo's death. No footsteps, no conversation, just the soft ticking of the grandfather clock echoing down the marble hall. I stayed in the nursery with the baby pressed against my chest, rocking slowly, trying not to imagine the sound I hadn't heard but knew too well, the single crack that ends a life. Somewhere below, a door shut, then another, then nothing. When Rossi finally appeared at my door hours later, he looked different. Not bloody, not frantic, but emptied. His shirt was clean, his expression carved in stone. Only his eyes betrayed him, dark, sharp, rimmed with exhaustion that wasn't physical. "You shouldn't have been there," he said quietly. "I shouldn't be anywhere near here," I shot back. "But here we are." He exhaled through his nose, like he wanted to argue but couldn't find the energy. "You were right," he said, "about the recording, about Enzo." I folded my arms. "You didn't need to kill him to prove it." His gaze lifted, cold but steady. "No, I needed to kill him to end it." The way he said it, detached, practical, made me shiver. Every problem doesn't have to end in blood, Rossi. He looked at me for a long moment, then said softly, "In my world, it's the only language people still understand." Later that night, I couldn't sleep. I walked the east corridor alone, one arm cradling my bandaged shoulder. The air smelled faintly of gunpowder and rain, a strange combination that somehow fit this place perfectly. At the far end of the hall, behind a cracked door, I heard voices. One was Rossi's. The other was unfamiliar, older, gravelly, with a tone that bent toward fear. "He confessed to working with Vitale remnants," the older man said. "But that wasn't all. He mentioned Files. Files? Rossi's voice sharpened. Encrypted. Alessandra's files. She'd been gathering proof of your offshore accounts. She was going to run Milanesi with the child. A chair scraped against marble. She was what? Rossi's tone turned dangerous, quiet, restrained, lethal. That's what Enzo said before. Before he begged? Rossi cut in, voice like steel. Silence. I backed away from the door. The floor creaked once beneath my foot, and that was enough. Abby! His voice was soft, but it carried across the corridor like a command. I froze. Come in. The door opened before I could turn away. Rossi stood there, one hand on the frame, the other holding a glass of amber liquid. His tie was loosened, sleeves rolled, the serpent ring glinting faintly under the chandelier. He gestured toward the older man, who was already rising to leave. Giovanni, that's all for tonight. When we were alone, Rossi crossed the room and poured another drink. You like walking halls at midnight? I like knowing where I am, I said, since you seem to decide that for everyone else. He smirked faintly. You're angry again. I'm breathing again. He turned toward me, eyes narrowing. You heard. Yes. Then you know she betrayed me. I met his gaze. She tried to leave. That's not betrayal, Rossi. That's survival. He didn't speak for several seconds. The silence between us stretched, tight as a violin string. She was carrying my child, he said at last, and she wanted to take him away, hide him from me. Maybe she wanted to protect him from this, I said, motioning around the room. From you. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't read, something between fury and grief. You think I would harm my son? I think your world already has. The words hit him like a blow. He turned away, jaw tightening, then walked to the window overlooking the lake. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the rain beginning to fall against the glass. When he finally spoke again, his voice was quieter. Do you know what it means to have everything you love taken from you and still have to smile for the people who caused it? I hesitated. Yes. He turned, surprise flickering across his face. Your fiancé. My baby, I corrected softly. And the man who couldn't look at me the same after. He studied me, really studied me this time, the way he might examine a weapon or a wound. You understand loss. I understand choices, I said, and you keep choosing blood. He set the glass down, walked toward me slowly. Because blood is the only thing that doesn't lie. He stopped just close enough for me to smell the whiskey on his breath, expensive, old, bitter. Enzo wasn't the end, he said. The Vitale family still wants my son. They think he's their heir by right. And you? I think he's my redemption. He stepped even closer, and my pulse jumped. You saved him twice, Abby. Once in the hospital, once in this house. You've earned the right to hear the truth. I swallowed. Then tell me. He picked up a small device from his desk, the same black disc I'd found in the bear. He pressed a button, and static filled the air. Then a voice, faint, distorted, but unmistakably Enzo's, played through the speaker. She had the proof, all of it. Transfers, names, offshore codes. Alessandra knew everything. If Rossi dies, the files go to the police. If not, she was going to sell them to the Vitale family for her freedom. My breath caught. She wasn't trying to destroy you. She was trying to escape you. He stared at the device, jaw tight. And in doing so, she killed herself. That's not fair, I said. Neither is this life, he said quietly. He turned off the recorder and set it down. The sound of the click echoed like a gunshot. I sat down, the weight of it all pressing on my chest. So what now? You've avenged her death, silenced your enemies, and still no one's safe. Where does it end, Rossi? He walked toward me again, stopping a few feet away. It ends when my son grows up in a world where no one can use him as leverage. Even if that means you become the thing they fear most? He met my eyes. Especially then. There was no hesitation in his tone, but something behind it cracked. The faintest trace of a man who wished the answer could be different. I don't want to understand you, I said, but I do. He exhaled slowly, eyes softening for the first time in hours. That's what frightens me. He turned away, but before he reached the door, he paused. You should rest. Tomorrow, the council gathers again. I'll make it clear you're not to be questioned or touched. You're under my protection. Protection feels a lot like captivity here. He looked back at me, and this time there was something raw in his voice. Then call it what it is. Protection, captivity. It's all the same when the walls are meant to keep monsters out. And in? I whispered. He didn't deny it. After he left, I sat in the quiet, listening to the rain, the faint hum of the house, and the soft, steady breathing of the baby asleep in the next room. There was no peace here, only pauses between storms. I'd thought saving lives meant healing wounds, stitching up what was broken. But in this house, every wound opened another secret. Every secret bled truth. And I couldn't tell if Milanesi Rossi was the man I was saving, or the one I needed saving from. Morning came wrapped in silence again. Not peace. Silence. The kind that sits heavy on the walls, waiting for the next command. Lucia dressed me before I could protest. Mr. Rossi requests your presence in the great hall, she said, her tone clipped, careful. You should wear this. She held up a gown the color of bone-white silk, elegant, simple, terrifyingly deliberate. I frowned. Requests? Or orders? In this house, Lucia said softly. They're often the same thing. I wanted to argue, but the baby stirred in his cradle, small fists stretching toward a light he couldn't yet understand. I couldn't leave him alone, not even for a minute. As if, reading my thoughts, Lucia added, He'll be with you. It's part of the arrangement. That word, arrangement, made something cold crawl up my spine. Still I dressed. The silk whispered against my skin as Lucia tied the back. I looked in the mirror and saw a stranger. Hair brushed into waves, bandage hidden under fabric, face pale but composed. A nurse turned unwilling queen. When I stepped into the corridor, 2 guards flanked me immediately. One carried the baby in a polished wooden cradle. The other opened the doors to the great hall. And then I saw them. Rows upon rows of men. Over 200, maybe more, dressed in black, their faces solemn, reverent, unreadable. The chandeliers above threw gold across the marble floor. The long table had been cleared. In its place stood Rossi, tall and sharp as a blade, his serpent ring catching the light like fire. Every eye turned to me. For a heartbeat, the world stopped breathing. Rossi's voice broke the silence. Bring her forward. My steps echoed against the marble, slow, deliberate, the air thick with power I didn't understand and didn't want. I stopped a few feet from him. The baby stirred, his tiny hand curling as if sensing the tension. Rossi's gaze moved from me to the crowd, his voice calm but thunderous in its restraint. This woman, he said, brought my son into the world. She saved him. Twice. She bled for him. For me. He paused, eyes sweeping the hall. She stood where men have fallen and did not break. Murmurs rippled through the room. Some of the men looked uncomfortable, others curious, a few defiant. Rossi continued, his tone deepening. From this night forward, she is not our prisoner. She is not a servant. She is family. The hall went utterly still. She will stay under my name, under my protection. You will treat her as you treat me, with loyalty, with respect. And then, the words I never expected. She is our queen. The room erupted. Voices overlapped in shock, protest, and disbelief. She's an outsider. She's a liability. This breaks every rule. Rossi raised one hand, and the noise died instantly. His control was absolute. He turned toward me, his eyes finding mine. Kneel. I didn't move. My breath hitched. Excuse me? His expression softened, just barely. It's not submission, he said quietly. It's recognition. I hesitated, then knelt, holding the baby close. His small hand reached out, touching the fabric of Rossi's jacket as if crowning him in return. Rossi stepped forward, lowering himself until he was level with me. He touched the child's head, then my shoulder, gently, reverently. In a world built on betrayal, he said softly enough that only I could hear, you've proven something rare. Loyalty without blood, courage without permission. He straightened, his voice carrying through the hall again. From this night, she is Lai. Regina di Sangue, the Queen of Blood. A murmur ran through the men. Confusion, reverence, perhaps even fear. I stood slowly, still holding the baby, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear the rest of what he said. Rossi continued, those who kneel tonight kneel not to weakness, but to rebirth. Our family stands because blood does not always mean kin. It means sacrifice. And one by one, the men knelt. All of them. The hall filled with the sound of hundreds of knees hitting marble. A thunder of obedience and disbelief wrapped in the same motion. I stared at the sea of bowed heads, frozen, caught between awe and terror. Then Rossi leaned close to me, his breath warm against my ear. Now they'll protect you like they protect me. He said it like a promise, but I heard the warning buried inside it. When the ceremony ended, the hall emptied in silence. The guards lingered at a distance. No one dared speak to me. Rossi escorted me through the corridors himself. The weight of what had just happened pressed against every breath I took. Finally, I broke the silence. You had no right to do that. He looked at me sideways, amused. To protect you? To claim me? He stopped walking. Would you rather I left you vulnerable? I would rather you asked. He stepped closer, his tone low. Asking is for men who can afford to be refused. My heartbeat stuttered. You turned me into something I didn't choose. He studied me, unreadable, unwavering. You didn't choose it, he said. You earned it. We reached the nursery. I set the baby down gently, my hands trembling. Rossi lingered in the doorway. You think I did this for power, he said. You're wrong. Then what? I asked, turning toward him. To own me? To make me part of your collection? His eyes darkened. To make sure no one ever uses you against me again. That's not protection, I said. That's possession. He took a step forward. It's survival. No, I said, voice rising. It's control. We stared at each other. Predator and prey, or maybe just two people too damaged to know the difference anymore. Finally, he exhaled, shoulders lowering slightly. You don't understand what this means yet. Then explain it to me. He walked to the window, looking out at the lake where moonlight fractured across black water. In my world, to protect someone, you must make them untouchable. You give them a name stronger than fear. I shook my head. You gave me a crown made of chains. His gaze flicked toward me, something almost like pain flashing there. And yet, he said quietly, you still wear it. He left without another word, the door closing softly behind him. I sank into the chair beside the crib, staring at the sleeping baby, his tiny face peaceful, unaware of the power he represented. Outside, thunder rolled across the lake, distant but coming closer. I ran my fingers over the silk gown, feeling the weight of it. It wasn't just fabric. It was a symbol of a world that had claimed me, of a man who saw loyalty as love and love as armor. I whispered to the baby, you've got your father's silence, little one, and maybe my stubbornness. God help us both. For a long time, I just sat there, listening to the rain against the glass. In the reflection, I saw myself, pale, exhausted, wearing a crown no one could see but everyone felt. Rossi had given me power I didn't ask for, and power, I was starting to learn, was just another word for responsibility soaked in fear. Power has a sound. It isn't loud. It's the silence that follows your name. For days after the coronation, the mansion moved differently. Guards who once ignored me now bowed their heads. Servants whispered La Regina when they passed. Even Lucia started speaking with the kind of reverence that made my skin crawl. I hadn't asked for this, any of it, but the title hung over me like perfume I couldn't wash off. The Queen of Blood. Rossi's words still echoed in my head. Now they'll protect you like they protect me. It wasn't protection. It was confinement with applause. Every window was a mirror now, every shadow, a reminder that eyes were everywhere. Even in solitude, I wasn't alone. By the third night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through the hall that overlooked the lake, the marble cool beneath my bare feet. Moonlight shimmered over the water, fractured and restless. Like me. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, measured, familiar. Couldn't sleep? Rossi's voice carried through the quiet. I didn't turn around. Hard to, when your guards follow me from room to room like I'm a prisoner. He stopped a few feet away. You're not. Then why do I feel like one? Silence. When I turned, he was standing near the window, still wearing the same black shirt he'd worn earlier, sleeves rolled, collar open. His tie was gone. His ring caught the moonlight, the serpent's gold eyes glinting like something alive. Do you want to leave? He asked quietly. The question hit harder than I expected. My throat tightened. I don't know. He studied me, as if searching for something I hadn't said yet. Then don't answer tonight. I frowned. You think time changes everything? He stepped closer, voice low. Time changes nothing, but it reveals what we're pretending not to know. For a moment, neither of us moved. The only sound was the wind outside, brushing the glass like a whisper. He took one more step, closing the space between us. Do you regret saving my son? No. Do you regret saving me? I didn't save you, I said softly. I just refused to watch you bleed. He smiled faintly. That's mercy. It's humanity, I corrected. You should try it sometime. He didn't reply. He just looked at me the way he always did, like I was a puzzle he wasn't sure he wanted to solve. The next morning, I found Lucia in the library sorting letters sealed with crimson wax. What are these? I asked. Invitations, she said. The council wishes to see you. See me? For what? To pledge loyalty, she said simply. You're their queen now. The word queen still didn't fit in my mouth. It tasted like irony. When I entered the council chamber, the men stood one by one, nodding or lowering their heads slightly. Some were polite. Some avoided eye contact. Some looked at me like I'd stolen something that wasn't mine. Rossi stood at the head of the table, hand resting on the back of his chair, voice calm but commanding. "You all know why she's here. Say what you must, but remember who hears you." One of the lieutenants, an older man with slicked hair, cleared his throat. "With respect, signore, the nurse has no blood claim to this house. Her presence changes the balance." Rossi didn't blink. "Balance is overrated." Another spoke up. "The Vitale family is watching. Rumor spreads fast. They think she's weakness." "Then let them," Rossi said. "Weakness is the perfect disguise for strategy." He turned to me suddenly. "Abby, tell them what you told me once, about blood." I froze. "What?" He gave me the faintest nod, a look that said play along. My pulse thudded. I said, I swallowed. "Blood isn't just inheritance, it's sacrifice." A murmur ran through the room. Rossi's lips curved faintly. "You see? She understands what most of you forget." And just like that, the argument died. When the council dispersed, I lingered near the window, still shaken. Rossi joined me a moment later, voice softer. "You hate this," he said. "I hate being used," I replied. He tilted his head. "You weren't used. You were listened to. By men who'd rather see me dead than respected." "They'll learn," he said simply. "And what if they don't?" His gaze hardened. "Then I'll remind them." That night, the house quieted again. I sat near the crib, tracing my finger along the baby's cheek. He stirred, sighing in his sleep. So small, so oblivious to the world trying to claim him. Rossi stood in the doorway, watching. "He sleeps easier when you're near." I didn't turn. "He deserves peace." "And you?" "I deserve freedom." He entered the room, each step deliberate. "You think those are different things?" "They are here." He stopped beside me. "You mistake the walls for chains. They're shields, Abby." I looked up at him. "You've lived behind shields so long, you don't know the difference anymore." For the first time, he didn't argue. He just knelt beside the crib, his hand resting gently on the railing. "I didn't choose this life," he said quietly, "but I built it to keep others alive." "And how many died along the way?" He looked at me, eyes dark but honest. "Too many, including the man I was before it started." I didn't expect the confession. It landed heavier than any threat. "Then why keep going?" I whispered. He glanced at his son, then at me. "Because if I stop, the blood I've spilled will mean nothing." Silence fell again, not awkward, but intimate in a way that felt dangerous. I should have moved. I should have stood. Instead, I stayed, watching him, this man built from violence, kneeling beside the child he'd sworn to protect, his expression soft and tired and human. Without thinking, I reached out and brushed a drop of something from his cheek. Not sweat, not blood, a tear. He didn't flinch, didn't move, just looked up at me like I'd done something forbidden. "Don't," he said softly. "Don't what?" "Make me feel like this." His words were more plea than warning. I stepped back, my heart hammering. Maybe that's what you need, Rossi, to feel something other than power. He rose slowly, towering over me again, eyes locked on mine. "And if the thing I feel is you?" My breath caught. "Then you'll destroy it." He didn't deny it. He left before dawn, called away to a meeting. The house stirred without him, but it felt hollow, like it had lost its gravity. Lucia brought me breakfast, her smile tight. "He hasn't been himself since the attack," she whispered. I forced a small laugh. And what does that mean? Does the devil need sleep now? She gave me a look. Even the devil mourns his angels. When she left, I sat alone at the window. The lake shimmered under the morning sun, deceptively calm. Power, love, protection. They all blurred here, lines smudged by danger and devotion. Maybe Rossi hadn't trapped me. Maybe I'd stepped into the cage willingly the night I held his bleeding child and whispered, "You're safe now." Because part of me knew, once you save a man like Milanesi Rossi, you don't walk away untouched. You become part of his redemption, or part of his ruin, maybe both. That night, the sky cracked open with thunder. The baby stirred but didn't cry. I whispered lullabies to drown the storm, my voice steady even when my heart wasn't. Rossi didn't return until near dawn. When he did, his shirt was soaked, his knuckles bruised, and his expression unreadable. He stopped in the doorway, watching me hum to the baby. "You should hate me," he said quietly. "Maybe I do," I replied, "but not enough to stop caring." He stared for a long moment, then crossed the room and sank to his knees beside me, head bowed. "For once," he said, voice rough, "I don't know how to be the man I have to be." I touched his cheek, not out of pity, out of truth. "Then stop being him. Just for tonight." He leaned forward until our foreheads almost touched, close enough to share breath, not enough to erase the distance between us. When he finally spoke, it was a whisper that felt like a vow. "You are the only war I'll never win." The lake was too calm. That was the first sign. After weeks of storms, its surface lay still, glassy, deceitful. Even the gulls circling above seemed cautious, like the world itself was waiting for a decision. Lucia said dawn had come earlier than usual, but I knew better. It wasn't dawn that woke me. It was the quiet. The kind of quiet that follows endings. I wrapped the sleeping baby in his blanket, tracing my fingers across his tiny cheek. He looked like serenity carved out of chaos, innocent, unaware that the people who loved him most were the reason his world was never safe. Behind me, the door opened. I didn't have to turn to know it was him. Rossi. His reflection moved across the glass, tall, deliberate, composed. But his voice carried a weariness I hadn't heard before. "It's over," he said. I turned slowly. He stood in the doorway without guards, without armor, wearing only a dark shirt and that serpent ring that had seen too much blood to shine anymore. "What does over mean?" I asked. "The Vitale line is finished. Those who opposed me are gone." "Gone," I echoed. "You mean dead." He didn't correct me. "So it's peace now," I said quietly. "It's silence," he replied. "In my world, that's the closest thing we ever get." I looked down at the baby. "Then what happens to us?" He took a slow breath. "That's why I came." We met in the study overlooking the lake. The curtains were half drawn, letting slivers of sunlight fall across the floor like prison bars made of gold. Rossi poured 2 cups of espresso, but didn't hand me mine. "There are 2 paths," he said. "Both safe, both final." I folded my arms. "I'm listening." He nodded toward the window. "First, you leave. I'll arrange everything. A new identity, a new life. A home in Florence or Paris, or anywhere far enough that my shadow can't reach you. You'll have money, freedom, and no one will ever come for you again." My chest tightened. "And the second?" He looked at me then, really looked. "The second is that you stay. Here, beside me. Not as a hostage, not as a nurse, as my equal." My pulse jumped. "Equal." He gave a faint self-mocking smile. "As equal as any man like me can allow." I stared at him, trying to find the trap. Why are you giving me a choice now when you've taken every other one away? Because I realized something, he said softly. I can force loyalty. I can buy obedience. But love, that's the one currency even I can't counterfeit. The words landed like a wound I didn't want to feel. You don't love me, Rossi, I whispered. You love that I make you feel human. He took a step closer, eyes searching mine. Maybe that's the same thing. No, I said. It's not. We stood in silence. The lake shimmered behind him, sunlight spilling like melted silver. He looked both powerful and painfully mortal, a man balanced between redemption and ruin. Finally, I asked, if I choose to leave, will you let me? He didn't answer right away. Then, yes. Truly? He nodded once. I won't stop you. I wanted to believe him, but even truth sounds like manipulation when spoken by a man who commands armies. That night, I packed a small bag, just clothes formula, the letter Lucia had tucked into my hand when she hugged me goodbye. She whispered, whatever you decide, remember, you owe no one your life. Her eyes glistened when she said it. The house was quiet, but I could feel it watching. Every camera, every guard, every echo in the marble knew I was leaving. The baby slept in my arms as I walked down the corridor toward the gates. Rossi's men didn't move to stop me. They bowed their heads instead. The gesture confused me more than opposition ever could. At the door, I hesitated. Freedom was a beautiful word, but it came with loneliness stitched into every letter. Before I could take another step, his voice came from behind me. You're really going. I turned. He stood halfway down the corridor, no guards, no weapons, no command in his tone. Just quiet acceptance. I told you I would let you, he said. I nodded. And I told you I might not want to. He stepped closer, slow, deliberate. I can't be the man you deserve, Abby, but I can be the man who keeps you alive. And what if I want to live, not just survive? He hesitated, and for the first time since I'd met him, Milanesi Rossi looked unsure. You'd be wasted in my world, he said. It devours light. Then teach it how to see in the dark. That made him smile, a small broken thing. He reached out, fingers brushing my cheek, his touch soft but trembling. I swore I'd never beg anyone, he murmured. But I'll ask this once. He took my hand and pressed it against his chest. Stay. Not as my captive, as my compass. The lake wind slipped through the open doors, cool and restless. The baby stirred, eyes fluttering open for the first time since we'd left the nursery. He didn't cry. He just looked between us, as if somehow, even at days old, he knew everything depended on what came next. I looked down at him, then back at Rossi. If I stay, I said, voice shaking, it's not because I'm afraid to leave. Rossi's reply was immediate, certain. Then stay, as my queen, not my captive. He exhaled, like the air itself had been waiting for that line. I didn't speak. I just stepped forward, closing the distance between us until our hands brushed, until the rhythm of his heartbeat pressed against my palm. The world outside kept spinning, but inside that hall, time finally stopped trying to fix us. Later, we stood on the balcony overlooking the water. The sky burned orange and rose, the kind of dawn that looked painted, not real. He stood behind me, silent, a presence more than a person. I watched the reflection of the sun dance over the lake and whispered, I don't know what this makes me. His voice came low, steady. It makes you alive. I turned. You think that's enough? For now, he said. Tomorrow you can want more, and I'll find a way to give it." He smiled then, not the cold, guarded one, the real one. And for the first time since the night he walked into that hospital, I believed him. The baby's soft cry broke the silence, small and human and grounding. I lifted him, pressing a kiss to his forehead. He blinked up at me with eyes that were neither hers nor his, something new, something pure. Behind me, Rossi's hand rested lightly on my shoulder, not claiming, just there. Together we watched the sunrise. The world outside still called him a monster. Maybe it always would. But monsters, I'd learned, were just men who ran out of ways to ask for forgiveness. And maybe women like me were the ones who handed them a map. That morning, I finally understood what it meant to wear a crown made of blood. It wasn't about power. It was about choice. I had chosen to stay, to stand beside a man the world feared and teach him how to be feared less. Not because he deserved saving, but because we both did. As the sun climbed higher, I whispered to the baby in my arms, "You've lost one mother, little one. You won't lose another." And for the first time in a long, long while, I didn't feel trapped. I felt home. Not every queen wears a crown. Some earn it through courage, loss, and love. If Abby's story touched you, hit subscribe and tell us where you're watching from in the comment. Because every story like this proves, strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it heals.